Welcome back to Powered by Play. I'm Drew, and I'm a professor of theater at Chapman University in Southern California.
I'm Avery, and I'm a theatrical scenic designer. Every month on this podcast, we explore what we play, how we play, and why we play.
We believe play powers us, and that's what makes it powerful.
All right, Drew.
All right, Avery.
Press play. This time on Powered by Play, we are discussing playing dress up. From theatrical costumes to personal style, from school uniforms to superhero transformations, and even dabbling in the spooky and the carnivalesque, playing dress up can be a big part of our playful lives as humans of all ages. Yes, even kids and adults alike can enjoy dress up. It allows us to alter our appearances for aesthetic purposes, or encourage us to alter our behaviors to play a certain role. Dress up can be a tool to accentuate different aspects of ourselves, whether that's power, emotion, culture, group belonging, legacy, or just pure personal expression. I'm excited to talk about this with you, Drew. I would love to hear of some of your most recent or earliest memories of dress up.
Yeah, Avery, this is a great topic. I found this really cool quote from the designer Kate Spade. And Kate Spade said, "Playing dress up begins at age 5 and never ends." So I'm excited to see kind of who we were as kids, you're right, and how that sort of childhood interest in who am I when I put this on kind of continues into adulthood. My most recent experiences, I would say, so as you remember, Avery, every year at the end of the year here at Chapman University in the Department of Theater, we have the end of the year gala. And everybody gets a little bit dressed up. And so I wore dress pants and shoes, which ironically I don't wear to teach. We'll talk about that in a little bit. But I wore dress pants and fancy shoes and a dress shirt. And I wore this flowery jacket that was given to me by my cousin-in-law, Ryan. Thank you, Ryan, for this really cool jacket. And so I was getting lots of compliments on my flowery jacket. It was pretty cool. And it is actually fun to turn around and let people see the entirety of the costume. So that was lots of fun. And then also last year when I was traveling with my partner and my daughter in South Korea, we tried traditional dress, traditional hanbok dress that would have been around during the Joseon Dynasty. And so it was interesting, complete with hat, but also robes. And when we were trying on these traditional garments, they also talked about, okay, well, if you choose this hat, that means that you're a member of this particular class, or this color would make you kind of looked at this way. So it's really interesting to start to understand the semiotics of traditional dress and figure out how would I be seen if I stepped into a time machine and wore this a few hundred years ago. So it was also kind of cool because if you wear an outfit that belongs in the past, whether you bring it or whether you rent it, as we did, you are granted free entry into the former palace of the Joseon Dynasty in Seoul. Oh. So yeah, it's like if you cosplay, you don't pay, which was pretty cool. So as far as childhood, when I was in elementary school, one year, I spent a year in England because my dad was doing a job exchange with a guy who worked for the Open University in England. And so I spent a year as an American sort of cosplaying as a British schoolboy. And so I wore a school uniform, and that was the first time I'd ever worn a school uniform. So I had a green cardigan sweater, I had slacks and a little button-down shirt, and a green and gold tie. And let me tell you, it was a change wearing a tie every day to school. And so suddenly, instead of a kid who was kind of like, oh, what are other kids wearing and how do I match them, like in the States, I was one of a sea of kids who wore the exact same thing. And although everyone found maybe a little tiny bit of personal style, like maybe you loosened your necktie a little bit, or maybe you rolled up the cuffs on your cardigan or something like that, we all matched. We were all kind of a single group identity. We were students at that school. Apart from that, I remember the thing that I remember more than anything else about playing dress up when I was a kid was making crowns. And a crown was easy to make. You just needed a piece of construction paper, preferably something that looked like gold or silver, and then you cut little sort of triangles to make those jagged, I'm sure there's a word for them, whatever those jagged top pieces are to a crown. And that was cool. Like that was all you needed to get status when you were in a play that you were doing with your sibling or your cousins or your friends or whatever. So I remember that as kind of, oh, I have the crown now. Okay. I'm the king or I'm the prince, so I'm in control. And if you had that crown on, then any chair that was in the house was no longer just a regular chair. It was a throne. And so even a small thing made a huge difference. So those were my memories. How about you? Where did you start and what was the latest experience you had?
I did have school uniforms during my grade school experience. I went to a fancy K through 8 in Southern California, and we, as kids, if we were, born a girl, we were supposed to wear these like jumpers, I guess they were called. You had to wear like a polo shirt and then over that a jumper, which was like it had the top part and then it had a skirt at the bottom. Basically a dress. And then the boys would wear like pants and the shirts. And I do wish I had like the options to choose what I wanted to wear. I would have enjoyed like switching between both. I'm sure on colder days I would have preferred to wear pants. And now I'm looking back on it and I'm just wondering who gets to decide what kind of kid gets to wear the dress versus the pants. And I don't know, wouldn't it be so much more interesting if kids were allowed to choose between both? I don't know. But that was kind of my first foray into the style world because we would have days where you didn't have to wear your uniform, but they were really rare. And I thought I was so cool with my flare jeans and my yeah, and my like sneakers, but people were wearing Converse and skinny jeans, and I was completely surprised because I had never even witnessed those before, and I felt super uncool during those non-uniform days. I did enjoy having the conciseness of the options growing up because of that. After fifth grade, I went back to public schools. So after that, I forayed into my own style, which we'll divulge into more. But growing up, I also went to a lot of Vietnamese cultural occasions where I would have to wear an áo dài, which is a female traditional Vietnamese dress. It has like a dress portion and then there's pants underneath it, which is pretty cool. But you would wear colorful ones for New Year's, and you would wear gray ones for like Buddhist temple occasions, which is another kind of system of style and dress up that has its own rules and stuff. Beyond those cultural formal occasions, there were also other more American formal occasions, such as my piano recitals, which I would have to wear sparkly dresses for. I didn't love them, but I didn't even know that I could have worn anything different because I didn't really see any other females having other options growing up. I would have enjoyed a blouse or pants or both. I would have wanted more options, you know? I think that's what is really important about playing dress up is that when you get to play with like everything in your closet and your parents' closet, you get to put together the most outrageous stuff and then kind of justify it and make it yours. So I think I played with my dolls in terms of them dressing up, but I don't know if I played enough with myself dressing up as a kid. And other than that, Halloween, I was Blue's Clues dogs with my sister one year as a kid. I think I was the blue dog and she was the magenta dog. I think we've also been Barney characters and Pokemon creatures as well. And then my most recent Halloween experience was no, for me, I don't really do Halloween. I don't care about it right now as an adult. I'm not really into it because it's a little bit too much effort for me, and I'm just not super interested in dressing up for a random holiday. But my scenic design cohort at my grad school, we all dressed up as Wizard of Oz characters, and I didn't really want to participate, but they made me be the tornado, which was pretty cool. I got to wear a hat that had the tornado on it, and I just got to wear like all black and be depressing and mean. And it was really cool. Everybody else went all out, and my group ended up winning the group award for the Halloween costume of the year.
Hey,
So I think oh,
congratulations.
yeah. Thank you. Next year, we have to keep our next one a surprise, so I can't tell you, but
Oh,
we're
yeah.
gonna go all out again, and we'll see how we win in the competition.
That's really funny. You said, I didn't want to participate, but they made me. And I was kind of like, how much of life is that? I don't, wa- I don't want to participate in wearing a school uniform, but they made me. I
Yeah,
don't want to participate in putting on a tie, but they made me.
yeah,
Yeah,
absolutely.
I hear you. I hear you.
Well, what about the kind of style that you choose for yourself? How would you describe your own personal style, and what does it say about yourself?
Yeah, this is a really interesting question. I don't feel like I have an easy answer for this, like a lot of people. All right, so I teach theater students, and many theater students know exactly how to define their style or know exactly what they're looking for when they go thrifting or when they create their own stuff. I would say so. Here's what I put down here for this question in our outline. I usually want to wear something comfortable and usually a little bit comfortable, sometimes neutral colors depending on how I'm feeling that day, but usually a little bit colorful. I want to put a little splash of, something exciting into my day. Often I'll have something that's a little bit geeky, so maybe a shirt with a geek culture reference, or maybe something from like one of those shops like Threadless, where the artists get directly paid for their work instead of having to go through like, a manufacturer for clothing and stuff like that. So I love wearing the work of artists who don't have to make compromises when they submit their piece. It's just kind of like their piece on a shirt. When I'm teaching, it's usually jeans and my Doc Martens and a Henley shirt. So I kind of feel like the Henley shirt allows me to stay comfortable, but also it has buttons. So I hope the buttons portray or convey enough fanciness as a professor. I can say that I have never been told to change my wardrobe from Chapman University, so I assume that all is well and all is okay. What does it say about me? I think the fact that I like soft material rather than polyester or blends says something about I like having ease of movement. Maybe I like feeling hugged by my clothes. Like cotton is a very natural fiber and it doesn't fight your skin. You know what I mean? It works with your skin. And when I do wear collared shirts, because I have to elevate things a little bit, like button downs, Then I like a pattern in the shirt to tell just a little story aesthetically. I have, for example, one that's got like sand dollars and seashells on it. So I have to say, for fashion that is kind of cis guys fashion, there's a little bit of opportunity for styling, but not terribly a lot. I mean, colors, things like mint green or pinks in shirts or something like that, or maybe a plaid. Oh my gosh, something like that. That's usually about as far as things go. So
Yeah.
that's I guess what I can say about me. All right, what about you?
I do love that choosing who we appear to be every day is a sense of play, and I have learned a lot from my partner about experimenting with what I wear. And within the last year, I played around with my partner's wardrobe, and I have started to transition from skinny jeans to what's it called, wider leg jeans or straight leg jeans. So I've been wearing those kinds of straight legs. The politics around the skinny versus flare versus straight versus wide throughout our generation has been so funny to track, because now I'm wondering when skinny jeans are going to come back. They had such their moment in the 2010s.
They sure did. And then there's also like boot cut and
Yeah.
low rise, and the terms that they come up with for jeans are like the boyfriend jean or something like that. I totally agree with you. It's like, what exactly is this saying? And what is behind the trend of wanting skinny jeans? What did that say about people's legs? I don't know. Okay.
Yeah.
Just had to chime in.
Absolutely. So I would describe my personal style as quote unquote alternative. I wear a lot of androgynous stuff, a lot of black. Androgynous meaning literally t-shirts with the sleeves cut off, and then just black jeans or black pants that are not super feminizing. Um, and I do like accessorizing with chains and chokers and necklaces. I don't really love bracelets because they kind of get in the way when I'm typing on my laptop or, just sensory wise. And I would also describe all of this as kind of the basic watered down versions of what you would find at Hot Topic. Like, I don't go as far as the stuff on the racks of Hot Topic, but that's pretty much what I like when I go thrifting and when I just pull stuff out of my closet. It's just a lot of it's even what I wear to work too. It's just the black t-shirts with the sleeves cut off, basically to show off my arm tattoos, because I have like a lot of tattoos on my arms, and my pants always have paint all over them. I like to wear like Blundstone boots to work, and I wear a lot of Doc Martens like outside of work. And my clothes are nice clothes until they become paint clothes, because as soon as I get a drop of paint on them at work, they become clothes that I can wear to work and will get messy. But I think the part about the tattoos has been a big part of my style sense. My partner Danny brought up that, you know, tattoos are actually a very committed sense of dress up and play. They're an accessory in and of themselves. I mean, you're basically going through different lengths, aka pain and time and money, to express yourselves in a permanent way, and they can actually stand in place of accessories like bracelets or jewelry or anything. And I like that that's part of my quote alternative look, because I also forgot to mention I have had blue hair for a lot of years, I think. I dyed my hair blue, green, purple. Currently I've been dyeing it black, but the kind of black that I use fades to like a bluish, greenish. So that's pretty cool. And I like that I'm not exactly I'm not mainstream, I'm different, I'm unique, whatever. Um, even though there are communities of people who do dress like me, and I bond with them as well. But growing up, I did feel a little bit outcasted because I really liked scarves and boots and slouch beanies. I don't know what it was about beanies with a slouch to them, but I thought they were so cool as a kid. But I mean, we're both from Southern California. We both know that the weather does not ever really get cold enough for any of these items I just mentioned. So that's why I looked out of place a lot, is that would be wearing a scarf to school in 7th grade, and it would not be necessary at all. But now that I'm in the Midwest, I'm pretty happy because I get to actually wear these things. Except for slouch beanies. I now wear just regular beanies that have little horns in the corners. But that moment has passed.
I like a good slouch beanie still. I totally do.
Really? Oh, okay.
Yeah. So there's a little shop. It's kind of like a men's vintage shop here in Old Town Orange. It's called Joyride. And Joyride, one of the guys who works at Joyride is a haberdasher. And so he will create hats, fix hats, and one of the things that he makes is classic beanies, like classic like Archie and Jughead style and it just occurred to me that those beanies have that same crown triangle cut in look outside the beanie itself. Like if the beanie is the round part, then it has a sort of crown type thing around it, which is kind of cool. I never really thought about that. And then putting little buttons on your, like buttons with sayings and stuff like that, or just regular buttons. I think the guy who creates the beanies kind of gives people a start, and then they can add whatever kind of pins or buttons they want onto their beanie. But yeah, kind of cool. Well, it's not easy for us regular human beings to transform into whatever alter ego or superhero or version of ourself we want to portray. But my goodness, there are so many ways that those transformations have been handled in movies and TV and literature and all kinds of things. I remember, okay, so my classic of this was the old Wonder Woman TV show from the 1970s. And Diana would spin, and when she would spin around, she would suddenly change from Diana into Wonder Woman. And it was this whole, like, it was a whole thing. And it was, I don't know exactly how it happened, but who cares? She started spinning. When she was done spinning, she was Wonder Woman. So that was cool. I remember that. And she had, not only did she have her costume on, she had the lasso of truth with her. And she had her bracelets, her gauntlets that would stop attacks. So, there was a little bit of armor / weaponry in addition to the costume itself. In the movie The Mask and the comic series The Mask, he puts on the mask and everything else suddenly appears in kind of a flurry of movement. So the mask itself becomes the beginning of the costume, and then the costume completes itself to whatever's needed in the moment. In the Jim Carrey movie version, memorably, he had kind of a yellow zoot suit that appeared on him when he put on the green mask, and which was known as the Mask of Loki, and suddenly turned into kind of this, very cool Pachuco kind of singer guy who started singing and doing really crazy like movement stuff. The X-Men character Mystique, who can transform into any character, anyone, whether it's another superhero or just somebody that she needs to imitate for whatever reason. When she is transforming in her natural form, she kind of has blue scales and red hair. And so there's almost, I don't know if I would call this a choreographed movement, but the clothes kind of like, I would describe them as flowing onto her body. And so I think usually she kind of changes from like her head down to her toes. If I'm not mistaken, it's been a while since I watched the X-Men movies, but that was kind of cool too, to see just a costume flowing on to her and then her flowing back into her regular persona. So transformations, what are some of your favorites, Avery?
Well, the classic Sailor Moon transformations have got to go in that book for me because of growing up with Sailor Moon as my one of my favorite cartoons. Seeing how each of the Sailor Scouts had their own different accessories to help them transform into their uniform slash outfit to give them powers to fight evil, it was just so special. It was fun, and I didn't know the word campy at the time, but yeah, I would describe it as pretty campy now. And it is all about the euphoria of watching it happen with the music, the beautiful backgrounds, the animation, and then the final product arrives and it's just so satisfying too. And even when I like to dress up at home or when I would do so, putting on music while doing that helps you hone in the emotion and give you more of this catharsis moment because the music for us as humans is kind of how we recreate any transformations that we go through. But with Sailor Moon, I think having the beautiful music as part of the animation in the sequence. It was just such an iconic moment in every episode. Every episode they got to transform, and you knew that once they would, then the bad guys would be completely in danger. And they do the same thing in the show Miraculous Ladybug with like the Ladybug character and Cat Noir. They have like earrings that are actual creatures that help them transform into their powers. I know Ben 10 has his magical watch that helps him transform into different alien creatures to fight the bad alien creatures. And even with espionage and spies, I was totally obsessed with espionage as a kid. I think partly because they would transform themselves into different regular people too. Like they would have to blend in with a different group of regular people. And I also loved that spies traditionally had to learn different languages because that would be another way to disguise themselves and transform themselves. So not just with what they look like, but how they talk and how they act and the lingo that they know to blend in with the real citizens of other countries. I love to think about these like Sailor Moon transformations as kind of a specific genre of art almost. I think it's a unique art medium to be able to display the physical emotion behind transforming and the magic of it. It's so magical. And I think that's also why like magicians like to do stuff where they reveal like, oh look, here was this car behind this piece of cloth and now I take the cloth off and the car is gone. I think there's that wow factor, there's the illusion of it, and there's something about the final reveal that takes your breath away and makes you feel like some shift has happened in terms of the power dynamic or the emotion and whatever.
Yeah, I love it. I love it. And so, thinking about us as regular people turning into superheroes or having alter egos, whether they're fictional or whether they happen in real life, I thought of a few. I thought of a few examples. The Incredibles. Okay, so I love in the Incredibles series how Edna Mode is a costume designer, but her costumes for the superheroes also define their abilities or enhance their abilities, which is really cool. Like she had to make a whole stretchy thing for Elastigirl because if her costume couldn't stretch, how was she going to use her abilities? How was she going to stretch? If Violet's costume couldn't disappear with her, then how was she going to disappear? So I love the sort of like superhero costume designer. We'll talk more about costume design in a little bit, but I love that she was taking into account what they needed to be. And I think usually superhero costumes are kind of either tight leather or they're spandex. Classically, in the Avengers, when Black Widow lands, she kind of has this pose that she takes, and her outfit kind of like moves with her and helps accentuate the pose. And then, of course, her sister later on says, why do you take this pose? You're a poser. You're a poser. This is a pose. You're performing. This isn't actually a pose. So Yelena kind of gives her trouble for that. And I always thought that was hilarious. Like this consciousness of, oh, you're supposed to land in this pose, and the superhero costume is supposed to kind of accentuate it. But superhero costumes have looked a lot of different ways for a lot of different reasons. You also have like wrestling or lucha libre or something like that, with superheroes depicted with capes and masks. And I know you're going to talk about capes and masks a little bit, so I'll let you take that. Also, I would say things like sports jerseys or other sporty outfits, as if the wearer is the athlete or the athlete is a superhero. You put on your jersey or your uniform from your favorite athlete, and maybe just a little bit, you feel like that athlete and you feel like you could do things like they could do. And then, of course, there are fandom alter egos. And this gets into cosplay and a whole bunch of, okay, who am I when I'm cosplaying? How deep does the cosplay go? Am I cosplaying the Doctor, or am I actually walking around in role as the Doctor at a con or something like that? And of course, to continue with Doctor Who, if you're playing the Doctor, which one are you playing? And are you leaning into that Doctor's personality? Do you have the correct sonic screwdriver? All that good stuff. So cosplay and kind of fandom play has been really, really interesting to see. And it has emerged as I've been an adult. I mean, I think it probably more than anything started in Comic-Con and then got wider and wider into, like, cosplay is a daily thing for a lot of people, my students and just people out there in daily life. So I have seen a lot of cosplay. I used to see a lot of cosplay of Hogwarts students. And so when someone would cosplay, they would be, of course, not themselves, but a student at the School of Witchcraft and Wizardry, and they would be taking a certain class or classes, and they would typically have a wand that was their wand. Mermaid tales are huge. There was a really cool documentary about mermaids and how they choose their tail, how they get into their tail, the kinds of things that their tail challenges them with. But a mermaid persona absolutely is something that's going on now. And I'll mention furries as well. And furries as a subculture, the fusing of the human with the animal, fully moving into the animal, and what does the animal mean? I'm absolutely aware that in a lot of people's minds, there's a crossover between furries and alternative sexualities, but there doesn't need to be. And that's not really the point most of the time. Most of the time, it's sort of a bonding with what kind of animal do you feel represented by, and what animal do you feel that you kind of, overlap with. And of course, there have been a lot of attacks from conservative quarters about, oh, well, schools let kids dress up as animals, and there's a consistently debunked, but still kind of a stupid rumor out there that schools will allow kids to use the bathroom in litter boxes. This is not a thing. It never has been a thing. And yet it is kind of used. And so cosplay is used as kind of a political football a little bit sometimes. And lastly, I would say, how about fashion? How about high fashion? What is fashion if it's not kind of a superhero-esque or an aspirational way of dressing? If you look at something like the Met Gala, or you look at something like New York Fashion Week, or Milan, or wherever you are, you look at a piece of fashion which is ostensibly supposed to be something that people could wear. Met Gala's a little different, but like runway fashion is supposed to be things that maybe people could wear, but really it's about the outfit, the fashion, the costume, if you will. And in this case, the costume almost in many cases overwhelms the model. And it's really interesting to see how, like the Hadid sisters, for example, before they got famous, they were models that people didn't really know their names. They just kind of were people who modeled clothing, and it was about the clothes rather than them. But then you get to a point in a modeling career where suddenly it's, oh, what is Gigi Hadid wearing, you know? And what's going on with her choices and what's going on with people styling for her. So I don't know, maybe we could call that superhero fashion. Maybe we could call it superhero costumes, or at least sort of it has this notion of being aspirational. I have never been a high fashion person. I will look at the pictures of the Met Gala, or I'll look at red carpet photos and just kind of think, oh, okay, that's an interesting approach to the theme, or, oh, that person wore something that really expresses who I think they are. Memorably, I would say like Chapel Roan, for example, right? Chapel Roan often wears things that really say, this is who I am, and I am curating myself very specifically. So those were my notes on superheroes, alter egos, and fashion.
Yeah, I think you really made a great point about curation and how superheroes have to basically curate their entire identity as well as their purpose as superheroes too. I think like their costumes are all about hiding and controlling and manipulating their identity and their purpose and their intentions. With their suits, they might have technology or additional abilities that they create for themselves. Like Spider-Man in the retellings often has to make his own suit to, first of all, to hide his identity, but then once they start making, the webs for it, or, in some Spider-Man versions, they don't have to make their webs, they just come out of their hands for fun. But like the Andrew Garfield Spider-Man, he had to basically invent everything on his own. And same thing with Tony Stark, where he did kind of invent everything on his own, but has a lot of money and resources and is completely fine with everybody knowing who he is too. So there's that like identity hiding versus identity not so much hiding. And it is amazing when they do get a designated superhero costume person. I know they also do this in the show Invincible, and I think it's so cute because I mean having a superhero costume designer is super realistic for a world in which superheroes exist, and to have somebody who's dedicated to both the practicality and the meaning behind the suit and knows how to sew and do all the techniques of actual clothing making, it makes sense when a world designates someone to be the costume person, because why would some random superhero vigilante know how to make a costume that can stretch like Elastigirl or turn invisible? And I know that Edna Mode doesn't like capes, but they are super full of drama. I think there's a reason that capes have been so iconic for superheroes. They love tossing it around, it flourishes, just oh my gosh, it's so cool. Yeah, not practical. And so what? Capes are another great symbol of superheroism. And same thing with the masks. Like I noticed that in cartoons, when the superheroes put on their masks, a lot of times they don't have the pupils in it. Like for example, Robin from Teen Titans. I just I always noticed that as a kid because I was like, you've never seen Robin's eyeballs ever. And I'm like, okay, cool. I think that's just another symbolic way to show that the mask is both the person's face and also obscuring who we can really tell that they are. And I would also say that Batman's costume is another example of kind of all of these aspects where it is both it's all black to show his kind of serious intentions, but it's also like kind of showy and campy in my opinion, and it's kind of I think it's funny. I think adding like little bat ears, or they look kind of like cat ears, to your helmet face thing is, I don't know, I think it's fun. I wonder if he had fun making that because it seems like, okay, I don't know. It just seems a little silly to me, but I think that's kind of just part of it. That, yeah, it is a silly superhero thing, but I think the way that he takes himself very seriously and his role very seriously is part of the drama and the seriousness of his stories. But another reason to care a lot about what superheroes wear is that they do often have to blend in with civilians as well. Like Clark Kent's glasses and his messy hair is the, obvious selection for this example. And just because he looks weak or nerdy, you would never assume him to be a powerful superhero. And then, oh no, all of your expectations are kind of twisted. It's just another storytelling mechanism as well to kind of create the segregation between the superhero world versus the civilian world as well. And then one more thing as well with theme park costume characters, they are also another example of keeping the illusion alive in the public eye. And I remember this very funny video of, I think it was at one of the Disney parks where Elastigirl was walking in costume on stage and her her costume piece's head falls off accidentally, and then the
Oh my gosh, Avery. Oh no.
yeah, and it's kind of it's terrifying and hilarious at the same time, and you can see that the other employees are trying to like cover it up or like help them navigate their way backstage again to fix it up. And I think that's another very important part of theme parks is that they are all about the immersive and making sure that the illusion of a complete world is maintained. Same thing with this one episode in the second season of Squid Games, where one of the characters works at a theme park with, all these costumed characters. They're basically the mascot characters, and they go backstage in their break room. They're taking off their costume head to breathe because it's so hot in there. And then a little kid walks in accidentally, and then everybody puts their heads back on and like waves and is trying to keep the stitches of the illusion alive, basically. And I think the effort that goes into illusion and immersion is a very important part of what immersive like theme parks and experiences are supposed to be.
Oh yeah, absolutely. And to kind of transition into our next topic here, in the Disney parks, of course, if you are dressed up as a character, you are in costume.
Mhm.
And so, in fact, I was a main gate ticket taker. And so I didn't have a character costume, but I had my regular uniform, but that uniform was known as a costume. And so, interestingly, even if you are not playing a different character, you are playing a Disney cast member. And so every cast member, of course, gets a costume, not a uniform. And also in the Disney parks, adult kids can cosplay, but adults are not typically allowed to cosplay because, as you said, it might ruin the illusion. If there's someone running around as Peter Pan, say, right? And a kid comes up to someone, a guest playing Peter Pan, and starts to ask them about, can you fly for me? And the person says something like, I'm just here like you, kid. I just like Peter Pan. Leave me alone, right? It will kind of destroy the illusion. And so there are restrictions on who can wear what in the Disney parks, and they are relaxed at certain times during the year. But yeah, definitely. So uniforms. Okay, we talked a little bit about school uniforms. And maybe, you know, if you want to touch back on that, we can. But uniforms, I would say, have to do with expectations and control and conformity, creating a group out of a collection of individuals, right? So everyone has to look a certain way, and everyone has to be able to be recognized by what they're wearing. So a uniform tends to, I guess we could say, kind of swallow individuals and create group belongings. Sometimes those uniforms exude authority. If you are a doctor in a doctor's coat with a stethoscope, for example, right? Or a nurse in scrubs, or a police officer, for example. And memorably, in season 2 of Nathan Fielder's HBO Max show, The Rehearsal, Nathan Fielder, this is a spoiler for anyone who hasn't finished season 2, so just know that. At the very end, in the final episode, he reveals that he's actually secretly been training to be a commercial 737 pilot. And he finally puts on his pilot uniform, and people look at him in a completely different way. Like, he is not a comedian anymore. He's not a clown. He is a pilot with full authority to fly a commercial jetliner, right? And so even though we would say, okay, well, what does a uniform really mean? It says something. In the military, a uniform says what branch of the military you belong to, and if you have achieved a certain rank, or if you have a specialty in some aspect of soldiering. And so everything has meaning, from cords on your hat to stripes on your arms, to things on your chest. Whatever it is, it has a certain meaning. Police officers, you cannot simply dress up as a police officer and pass yourself off. That would be against the law. Also, doctors or anyone else who needs training in order to adopt a uniform. Now, when we get to the carnival-esque and misbehaving a little bit later on, there are times when people wear police uniforms that they are not trying to be a police officer. We'll talk about that a little later. But seriously, like, you can get, like, it is against the law to wear the uniform of someone that you do not have, whose job you do not have. I guess we can put it that way. And then we can go to simple suits. So suits, or back in the day for women, dresses and nylons, hats. There used to be an expectation for men specifically that you would wear a hat to work, a tie, all these different parts of dress being elevated when you went to work. Now, if you were and you know, now that I think about it, this probably has to do with class. And it probably has to do with instantly being recognized if you were a floor worker in a factory, or if you were somebody who had authority and you wore a suit, and that suit did not get dirty. but jeans and overalls and work shirts and those kinds of things, and those could get dirty. And so maybe that's, I mean, literally, Avery, we have blue collar and white collar and pink collar jobs. They used to talk about that in that way. So white collar jobs, you could not get that collar dirty. You were not supposed to get it dirty. It was supposed to stay clean. So really interesting. And then also in today's era, I mean, I think that anyone who wears a suit for work, someone like an attorney or maybe somebody in business, it harkens back to older ideas of Western dress, like in the 1800s. I'm thinking of Victorian times when suits kind of became what they would be into the modern era. And then back when my dad was interviewing for jobs at various tech companies, so we're talking like back in the 60s, maybe 70s, he would have been expected to wear a suit and be clean shaven, for example, if he worked for like IBM. After the internet boom of the 90s, tech companies, I think, went through rapid changes. And so startup companies, if you go to, say, Google, even today, right, if you look at what folks are wearing at Google, the Googlers don't have an expectation of wearing suits, right? They wear what's comfortable in order to do their work effectively. So that's kind of changed. There are dress codes for various things that you might go to, a fancy party, a ball, something like that, a business that wants to make sure that everyone matches, which would downplay individual expression. So if you are at a company or if you're maybe working at a retail outlet, say Target, right? The Target uniform is a red shirt and khaki trousers. And so, okay, Avery, have you ever been to Target wearing khaki trousers and a red shirt and had someone think that you worked there?
Fortunately not, but have you?
I have. I
What?
have, like, a couple of times, and I'm like, oh man, I wore the wrong thing to Target today. It was kind of crazy. But yeah, there are dress codes. Even to get into a club, there might be a dress code. And to get into, of course, like some organization, that you have to wear whatever the expectation is in order to be a member of that organization or society. You would have to comply with the dress code that was going on there. And then I think you could also talk about uniforms in terms of cultural dress. You were talking about this with Vietnamese traditional outfits. So is it a uniform that means you belong to a certain culture? I'm thinking of like folklorico dancers or mariachi who wear a very, very specific outfit that says, I belong in this time and place, and I am bringing this time and place into the modern day. When I was in Guatemala, the women specifically had particular weaves that they would put into their dresses that would indicate which village they came from, which regional association. And if you knew what you were looking for with the patterns on the women's dresses, you would know, oh, okay, she comes from specifically this particular village on this side of the lake or the mountain. And it was really interesting that someone who knew what they were looking for could determine where that person, quote unquote, belonged. Also, Scottish kilts. Okay, well, Avery, I have a kilt. I belong to the Scottish clan Hamilton, and so I have a specific tartan, right? Even though I'm an American, I'm in a small way a Scottish American. And so when I go to one of those parties that everybody's like, oh, wear something that reflects your heritage, I'm kind of like, okay, what can I do here? And I think the kilt, because it's sort of Not something that you would typically see in the States. I kind of go with that. I would have other options, I suppose, for the various heritages that go into me, but Scottish just kind of makes sense. And then, of course, there's this whole thing about, oh, are you wearing something under that kilt? Like, that's always, I think that's the first thing that people think about when they see a guy wearing a kilt, specifically a guy wearing a kilt, is, oh, is he being traditional? Is he being, quote unquote, authentic? So that's been kind of interesting too. But if you knew what you were looking for, you would say, oh, Drew, you're wearing that particular tartan, and so you belong to Clan Hamilton. And I have seen also, there's kind of been, I don't know if you've seen this, but I think through TikTok and other kind of short video formats, there's been a reclaiming of ancestral dress. I've seen this coming out of China with folks who are in different regions of China kind of going back and saying, okay, this is what my ancestors would have worn. I'm going to adopt that. And then it seems to be going a little bit from TikToks into wearing out in real life as well. So I know I spent a lot of time talking about uniforms and maybe had a wide definition, but those were my thoughts. I would love to know what your thoughts are on the whole concept of uniform in society.
Yeah. When you mentioned weddings, that reminded me of my sister's wedding. She had a traditional Vietnamese, like red ao dai dress for the morning tea ceremony part, which is the kind of the part of Vietnamese weddings where the families are kind of having their a ceremony together. And then she had a white dress for her main wedding part and for the part where she took photos with everybody. And then at the night part of the wedding, she had a blue dress, which was awesome. I think I remember going through the process with her as she debated like how many dresses she was going to have or what kinds and what styles, whether she even wanted a white dress at all, whether she even wanted to have a second dress after the white dress, and all of that. And there's so much tradition that goes into weddings and all of the costume changes that you might have during those, especially depending on your culture and such. Yeah, I also had to wear Girl Scout or Venturing Scout uniforms growing up when I was in those scout troops. We were a Vietnamese scout troop, so we did have stuff related to Vietnamese scouts that we did, but we also did the American scout stuff. So we kind of relied on the American Scouts uniforms, which kind of meant that we were able to float both between the Vietnamese Scout worlds and the American Scout worlds. And the for Boy Scouts and Venturing Scouts uniforms, you don't really have your badges on your stuff, but for Girl Scout uniforms, you do add a bunch of pins and badges and stuff to your vest, I think, and we had definitely slight friendly competition between us to see who could get the most badges. I was definitely high up there because I was very obsessed with completing, the whole roster of badge options. Another thing that my family would do sometimes is we would go to a Buddhist monastery for a retreat every so often, and there they would have monks with the saffron or the orange colored robes, which meant they were the highest rank. There were monks with brown robes for the rank below that, and then everybody else who was kind of temporarily staying would have gray robes because we were, uninitiated. And we didn't have to shave our heads when we went there, but of course, all of the more initiated monks and nuns would have shaved their heads. And they would also have beaded meditation necklaces and bracelets. And I think all of this kind of represents the tenets of peace that Buddhism kind of portrays for itself. And because it's all about the good morals, about meditation and compassion and kindness, of course they would not center outside appearances. And of course they would just have these solid, simple garments that allowed you to still move freely, but not necessarily accentuate, exciting things about who you are uniquely as a person. Not that it's not that it's silencing you as a uniform, but more so it's encouraging you to be quieter about that for a bit, or to meditate with yourself in quiet reflection rather than, jumping around advertising all the most amazing things about you all the time.
Yeah, a couple of things came up for me as you were talking. The idea of a religious uniform
Mhm.
or religious vestment, or I mean, we just had the conclave and selection of a new pope. And so looking at the for Catholicism, for example, like the difference between a parish priest who would typically wear the clerical collar and jacket, perhaps, and then the cardinals, when you get from bishop to cardinal, and the red color and the uniformity. And I also thought of that word, like uniformity, which is interesting because uniformity suggests we're all the same. And yet uniforms often will have rank associated with them, right? Like you were talking about the colors for the Buddhist monk, or in the military, the stripes or something like that. Or even in academia, our academic robes. I have, because I have a doctorate, I have 3 stripes on the sleeves of my academic robe. And I also have a gold tassel for my hat rather than the color that's associated with my specific academic discipline. So because I have a doctorate, I am sort of like put in with all the other doctorate holding folks, no matter what our disciplines are. So interestingly, uniformity, and then like the hats in Catholicism, I kind of think maybe get progressively taller. Like, there's a bishop's mitre, like a bishop chess piece that you might think of. And then, of course, the Pope has the triple crown, the pontiff's crown, and it's really interesting to me. So yeah, those things came up, which was really interesting.
Yeah, and we would always for every graduation, we'd also always complain about how expensive the pieces of fabric are that you have to don for the
Oh heck
robe.
yeah.
And yeah, it means so much, even though they're just simple pieces of fabric. As soon as you get your third stripe, you it means something, you know?
Absolutely. Well, and Avery, how ironic is it that in graduation, all these individual artists, all these students have gone through 4 years or more of differentiation suddenly are in the exact same black robe and mortarboard hat. And then, okay, of course, there are the people who decorate their mortarboard hats and make those a little more personal. For my Asian American Pacific Islander students, they'll often have leis or other kinds of like things worn around the neck that differentiate sort of identity. But I always thought that was strange. We taught you for 4 years to be an artist and forge your own path. Now get in the same outfit as everybody else in this whole school.
Yep.
A little crazy, right?
Yep.
Hey, life and society, man. Am I right?
Yeah, absolutely.
Online avatars. Okay, so who are you if you are your digital self? And how do you style yourself? How do you make the digital version of you special and unique? Um, it's really interesting. Sometimes I choose to have my avatars dress kind of like me, like in a Henley shirt and that kind of thing. There was a trend, I don't know if you remember this trend a few months ago, where you could take any photo, or I think it may be like they wanted you to send 3 photos and they would AI you up and put you in some kind of typically fantasy or sci-fi outfit. And so Rose did this with a couple of pictures that she had of me. And suddenly I was like, space, like Star Wars, space soldier or something like that. Or I had like a blaster by my side and I was in a space suit and that kind of thing. Or I was suddenly in like a fantasy world where I was dressed in furs and leather armor and my hair was all like done up in a quasi like Viking slash Game of Thrones kind of thing. And it was suddenly this idea of, well, I can transform you because I'm AI and all I need is an image and I can make it into a completely different image. In terms of RPGs, okay, so when I'm figuring out what character I want to be in an online role-playing game, I think about what will my armor look like? What will my armor protect? Am I a mage that I want to have my hands available, like not in glaives or whatever, some kind of gloves, so that I can make magical gestures if I need to? And the armor conventions I always thought were really kind of strange because you have this convention of your armor is always on. I mean, the tanks. So by tanks, what I mean for our listeners who are not RPG folks is those warriors who go in the front and they kind of like, I'll jump in the fray kind of thing. And so they take the brunt of the attacks from whatever monsters or enemies are attacking you. Like, do you sleep in your plate mail? Seriously? Like, if you are, there's no, in an RPG or a computer game, there's no time that passes where you have to like, oh, excuse me, kobolds, I have to put on my chainmail, right? Give me 1 second here, kind of thing. No, you wake up and you have your armor class is the same thing that it would be if you had been walking around all day in your chainmail or whatever. So I always thought that was kind of a little bit of a strange convention. But it's interesting to figure out what kind of armor do I want, what kind of colors do I want to display, and how, especially if I'm going to be in a game where other players are going to be quote unquote seeing me, right? Like my avatar is going to be seen by users besides me, kind of thing. Then I want to put a little of myself in there. Like, do I want my gray hair, right? Do I want some kind of maybe emblem, like a cat on a shield or something that indicates one of my interests? So those were my thoughts on digital costumes and online avatars.
Mhm. You're totally right that the avatar is basically an extension of yourself, and you can make it exactly like yourself if you want, but there's always limits, but you can also exceed your own limits in what you would personally never wear. And one of my favorite aspects of games like RPG ones like Baldur's Gate 3 or Dragon Age that it takes a while to fine tune your character, and they also allow for some non-binary or androgynous or genderqueer options. I always love the amount of options that kind of these online avatars are able to provide for you. And same thing with the online dress up games that have historically been marketed towards girls and have been popular from the 1990s to the 2010s. They're basically allowing you to play dress up, but just using the technology that we have to play around with different outfits. And there is this thing called a picrew. It's Picrew, and it's a Japanese paper doll style avatar customization maker website thing where users can make their own customizations from a selection of options, and you can also upload your own artwork to make customizations for other people to do. So my favorite one that I've customized as an avatar for myself lately, it's got it's a person with the upper body wearing a black suit, but instead of a head, so I guess it's not really a person, but the neck kind of connects to a plume of cartoon smoke, and it feels kind of
Oh,
like
wow.
androgynous and amorphous. It's very artistic and dark, and I think it's cool. And I think that it represents how I would like to be seen in certain online spaces. It's just kind of like dark, cool, edgy, mysterious, and kind of masculine in that way. But my partner has said that I'm starting to get them into video games, so if I just gave them the intro to Baldur's Gate 3, but only the part where they customize the character, they said that they'd be pretty happy with that. So I'll have to update you on
Nice.
how that goes for when I introduce them to that.
Oh, yeah, please do.
Yeah.
When you were talking about like head and then torso and then legs, so when I was a kid, we had these plastic toys that what you would do, I think they were called fashion plates or something like that. And so you would have like the head of a person, kind of like a paper doll, and then the middle, and then the legs or the bottom, and no matter what you chose, they would kind of like fit together. And then what you did was once you'd chosen your plate that you wanted for top, middle, bottom, you put a piece of paper over it and took a crayon and did a rubbing. And that rubbing would be your character no longer divided into three parts, but whole and in the costume or the outfit that you had created. It was kind of cool. I don't know if those exist anymore, but I remember that was a pretty neat, like, how would you change the pants on this person and think of them as a different person, that kind of thing.
Yeah, kinda like the mix and match of it all.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. I think there were like alien ones too.
Yeah, yeah.
So you can have the head of this alien, the middle, the bottom, or whatever. But yeah, I loved doing the rubbing with the crayon and seeing that character emerge. And then you could take other crayons and like color in the person or the alien or whatever. It was pretty cool. Yes, Gen X flashback. Okay. Okay, what happens when we get a little naughty? What happens when we look at the carnivalesque, at sexiness or at scariness or something that is taboo? Let's talk about that a little bit. So, of course, there are revealing costumes, stripper costumes, adult cosplay. Here's where I said I was going to talk about the police officer. Okay, so there are police officer costumes that you would not think were real police officer costumes because they're obviously made to be read in a different way. I don't know if you remember Beyonce's If I Were a Boy music video, but that was a really cool, so like the idea that Beyonce was figuring out what it would be like to be a cop, but her outfit is more of a sort of like sexy cop outfit, whereas her partner's outfit is the cop on the beat. And so that's something that when they sort of shift gears a little bit and you see, oh, this is him in a uniform versus her in a uniform, that kind of brings out how do we recognize what is supposed to look like the exact same uniform as, oh, no, that's a sexy cop. They're coming to do a dance, you know. They're not coming to arrest somebody unless they are. So, you know, that kind of thing. Adult cosplay, whatever kind of particular role you want to play for some kind of role play adult experience. Likely that will be available to you. And there are certain costumes that I think are typically seen, maybe like a Catholic schoolgirl or a nurse or, and of course in Japan, there's all kinds of culture around maids and maid culture, which isn't necessarily naughty, which is its own kind of, it can be anything from neutral to very naughty, but that's a whole story for another time. I also thought of this photograph by the controversial photographer Robert Mapplethorpe. He did a photograph called Man in a Polyester Suit. And this was a man who was dressed up in a very fancy three-piece suit but his genitals were exposed through the suit zipper. He had unzipped, and then everything he had pressed forward everything through that zipper, and so it was there was a lot of cognitive dissonance. Like, this is supposed to be someone who is very fancy and working with money, and then his genitals are completely exposed. So kind of asking you, what do you expect to see when you see a man in a suit? Is the complete absence of a costume nakedness? Is that a costume in and of itself? What is the sexuality behind nakedness versus non-sexual nudity? For example, sauna culture or other cultures where nudity is part of kind of an everyday or every week bathing experience or healthful experience, that kind of thing. And then shifting to scary, the idea of a mask or a kind of a monster outfit, maybe something like an outfit that would be found like a straitjacket from a mental asylum. Like, how does that take on new meaning when it's used in Halloween versus in an actual asylum where you need to keep somebody's arms from engaging in self-harm, right? A mask. Which friend is that? Who did I invite to my Halloween party? And now there's someone with a very scary mask, and who is that? And how do I try and figure out which friend that was? Fake weapons, also, of course. Trying to look like fake chainsaws, for example, in like possibly an escape room or a Halloween haunted maze or something. What's interesting is, for example, a chainsaw isn't really typically used as a weapon. It's used to cut lumber. But in horror movies, we've seen it be used as a weapon. And so if you see someone carrying a chainsaw, unless they're specifically dressed as a lumberjack on Halloween, you're probably going to think, oh, this person is kind of supposed to be seeming a little more scary because of this thing that they are carrying. So those were my thoughts on naughtiness, carnivalesque, sexiness, scariness. What do you think?
Yeah, my one thought is that burlesque dancing, I have taken a couple classes in it. It's very fun. You basically get to play with your clothes, the layers, taking off the layers, and I think it's a real treat for the audience. I've also seen some of the performances from local burlesque performers, and it's all about the tease, the seduction, the dance. I think people who've been performing burlesque get the biggest cheers when they play with tempo and they are basically connecting with the audience with eye contact or like resonating on some sort of level with their emotions and feeling present and just doing whatever they can to really make sure that the audience is excited for what they're about to put down and all that. So I I'm definitely looking forward to taking some more burlesque classes in the future. I think it's also fun to play with the musicality of it and the genderness of it. I would be interested in learning more masculine styles of it. I think currently I've learned more feminine styles of burlesque, but I think it's a very interesting art form and it is about dressing up, but it's also funnily enough about undressing up as well.
Yeah, absolutely. And related to burlesque, but also, of course, its own thing, is drag performance. And so, since we're in the section on the carnival-esque and breaking the rules, drag lets folks break the rules of the clothes that they are supposed to, in quotes, wear according to their gender.
Mhm.
And so, I mean, There's a whole, we could say so much about drag, Avery. We really could. But the idea of how do you vanish into a new persona? How do the clothes that you're wearing and the makeup that you're wearing allow you to cross over that barrier in the one space that you are able to do that? Like most of the time, it'll be in a drag bar or a drag theater, right, on stage. And so specifically, it's like, no, this is the place that drag is allowed to happen, not out there in real life, not in the workplace, not in the bank, right? It's kind of interesting because of its contained nature, but also absolutely 100% playful and absolutely 100% associated with who are you, who do you want to be, and how do you kind of move between who you are, what the expectations are on you, and then who you want to be and who you are able to be when those expectations are not there. Should also mention drag story hours, right? So apparently there's a problem in some circles with mixing drag performance with children. And not exactly sure what's going on here because drag performance in childhood have a long history. I mean, think of all the Disney movies when characters are in drag, right? Dress up in drag. Think of pantomimes and how pantomimes, or even Peter Pan. I mean, Peter Pan all the time has a woman, an identified woman, playing Peter Pan, who is supposed to be a male character, right? So, but there's, I think, as with, we talked about furries earlier, I think as with furries, there is a kind of shift into the sexualization of drag. Don't get me wrong, there are some naughty drag shows. There are some drag shows where it's all about flirtation. It's all about getting you to acknowledge your sexuality as someone in the audience. It's not a requirement. It's not, it doesn't mean that if you are in drag, you are specifically engaging with your sexual self. Any thoughts on that?
Yeah, I think that people need to pay more attention to drag as just the musicality art form and how it's really about embracing the game of dress up to the max. And I think the problem, in addition to that, is that people think that dress up is just for girls or just for, gay people. But I think because of the misogyny and the homophobia of that, that's also why drag as dress up is villainized by a lot of people.
Yeah, absolutely. And so, listeners, you may be listening to this episode during Pride Month. So, there's a little bit of a shout out, and there's a little bit of a queer whoop whoop to all those folks out there who are going to be dressing in drag or are going to be exploring queer personas specifically in this month in ways that they might not other times during the year.
So,
Woohoo! And finally, we come to theater, costumes, dress rehearsal. And I'm going to give a shout out here to my cousin Kate, who's a costume designer and also has worked as a dresser and has managed costume shops. And so, costume designers work with the text of the script, the director's vision, right, and their take, their interpretation of the script, and also the actor that they know is going to be playing the role in order to kind of find the costume, find what those characters are going to be wearing. Occasionally, you will have situations where actors bring in stuff from their own wardrobes, but most of the time you have specifically a costume designer. And one of the things that costume designers think about, that Kate thinks about, is yes, it's a costume that she's designing, but for this character, it's their daily wear. And so it has to be something that makes sense for them to actually get up and put on in the morning, and something that they would choose if they are curating themselves. What would they choose? How would they choose to announce themselves to the world or explain themselves to the world through what they're wearing? So it's constructed for the stage, but it also has to make sense with the presumed truthfulness, right? The contract that you make where you agree to suspend your disbelief and you agree to say, okay, I'm walking into this theater, and if that person is wearing green makeup and is wearing a black cloak and is wearing a pointed hat, I'm going to say that person is not the person I know, but that person is Elphaba in Wicked, right? Or is the Wicked Witch in a production of The Wizard of Oz. And so that is what Elphaba would wear every day because that's who she is. I think what's really interesting is that a costume has to be comfortable for an actor to wear, in addition to doing all the other characterization work that it needs to do as semiotics for the people watching the play, right? You have to be able to move around in your costume or you're not going to be able to perform effectively. Even after light and sound cues, costumes are one of the last things that gets added into a production. And often you will hear actors talk about finally finding the character in dress rehearsal. Late in the game, but sort of, I would think like just in time to fully inhabit their character. They'll talk about, oh, I didn't understand what it meant to be in a David Mamet play where there are like salesmen walking around until I had to wear this cheap suit, right? Or I didn't really understand what it meant to be a princess until they had my dress and my tiara, and I was standing there as like, you know, the princess in Great Comet, and I finally understood, oh, when people look at me, they see my tiara because now I have a tiara, that kind of thing. So I don't know. In the process, the actors don't usually have an idea of what their final costume is going to look like. But the costume can define so much about how they stand, if they can sit in it, how they'll move in it, and how all the other actors look at them. Those were my thoughts. What do you think?
As a scenic designer who has to collaborate a lot with costumes design, I totally am so glad that costume designers are so good at what they do because they are basically the other complete they are the part of theater that completes it and tells the rest of the story that everything else cannot. And whether it's planning quick changes backstage during the show or even having costume changes on stage, I think even I can design as beautiful and elaborate of a set as I can, but if the costumes don't match with it or work with it, then the cohesion of the design intention for the show is lost. For example, Chapman did Xanadont several years ago. That was my one of my first scenic designs on a big scale, and it was basically a world in which everybody is queer, but then two straight people fall in love. And we had a lot of homages to queer artists and icons, such as the the set itself was covered in designs inspired by Keith Haring's doodles. I basically learned Keith Haring's doodle style and recreated it in a way that matched this world. And then the costumes on top of that were very colorful, they were very campy, and referenced Andy Warhol and other queer artists, and just had a lot of fun. I think the costumes themselves had just as much fun as the actors themselves had. And it was a very colorful world that we portrayed for them because we were trying to portray a world full of emotional color and just joy in being queer, and also the power and hierarchy of having the queer people finally be on top and having straight people be oppressed. It was just a very fun story to tell. Another example was of recently Winter's Tale, which finally opened and closed this past spring, where I had the world of, and Winter's Tale, this is by Shakespeare, so the world of Cecilia was made out of brutalist concrete, and the costumes kind of referenced Mesopotamian royalty. And this was kind of an interesting combination of eras where it wasn't necessarily one or the other, but rather both the costumes and the sets working together to kind of create this new world that had both of these elements. And the set for the other world in this play was for Bohemia, which was all about colorful impressionism inspired by Monet. And it was like, it's kind of a world where it's permanently spring all the time. And then the costumes are inspired by rural peasantry. And so those kind of go together. So it was kind of a one show where two different worlds had to live on stage in the same space, and the costumes and the set were completely working together to tell this story. Another fun example of using costumes to tell a story is with Dropout, the video platform. There's a show called Very Important People where basically these makeup and costume designers create a complete in-depth dress up for an improv actor, and they give the actor time to find who the character is before they go on to the set to perform an interview about who this character is. There's one where an actor was dressed up as a rock. There's one where they were dressed up as a witch, one as a robot, all these kinds of costumes that just are very, very elaborate and completely just on the spot. The actor just is like, all right, cool. So I have this costume. Now, what do I think this character is? Who am I? How do I move in this? How do I, give an entertaining interview? And then they just record the interview, and it's a lot of fun. I highly recommend.
Nice. Sounds really cool.
Yeah.
So, final thoughts. What do you need to wear? What do you want to wear? How is dressing a playful experience? How is dressing a rehearsal for who you want to be how you want to be thought of and who you want to be thought of as in the outside world? And as you said, like everything from bodily adornment to, hats, shoes, everything from our head to our toes, thinking about how is all of it both us and what society expects of us, and how do those two have a conversation with each other? It's been really interesting, and I know you've got some really cool final thoughts to share as well.
Yeah, we've gone on to a really, really deep dive of dressing up, and I'm so glad that we were able to explore this together. My partner, who I interviewed for thoughts on this episode, they love playing dress up. Like, for them, playing dress up has been especially helpful for exploring their gender expression, such as when they look in both the men's and women's sections in the thrift store, they're able to try things on to kind of define their own gender identity. And that's been something that I've learned a lot from and has really inspired me as I explore my gender identity as well. Because they say when you were playing dress up as a kid, it wasn't about putting on clothes that looked good, it was about clothes that changed you. They liked to put on the most ridiculous outfits when playing dress up and then come up with a persona. And I really admire the amount of play that can come into playing dress up. And I think I am gonna set a goal for myself and play some more dress up again and see how that changes me and see what I can learn from that. Because, as they say, playing in ostentatious and wild ways can tell you a lot about yourself, and it's about the power in the experimentation that really allows you to grow and play more roles that you didn't think that you could play before. So this is our this is our episode version of a love letter to the game of dress up, as we could ever do so.
And listeners, we'll see you next month.
This has been Powered by Play with Avery and Drew. If you've been enjoying this podcast, you can support us online at Ko-fi. That is ko-fi.com/poweredbyplay. Thank you so much for listening, and we'll catch you next time.